The world saw Sarah Ashton as the woman who had everything. Gleaming towers bore her family name, luxury cars lined her climate-controlled garage, and closets overflowed with couture most people only saw in magazines. Yet, within the polished marble walls of her sprawling estate, a chilling silence echoed, a vast and aching emptiness that no amount of wealth could ever hope to fill. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating, built upon a foundation of privilege, but utterly devoid of the simple warmth she craved. This profound, silent despair behind the dazzling facade was a secret pain, a stark contrast to the effortless perfection she projected. It gnawed at her, a constant, dull ache in the core of her being. Prepare to witness the hidden vulnerability beneath the veneer of invincibility, and the lengths one soul will go to escape the prison of its own making. If stories of true resilience and the relentless pursuit of belonging touch your heart, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel to uncover more journeys where courage triumphs over despair. She moved through her opulent life like a ghost in her own mansion. The scent of exotic lilies filled the air. The texture of silk felt cool against her skin. The sight of priceless artwork adorned every wall. Yet none of it brought genuine joy. Sarah possessed a fortune vast enough to solve most of the world's problems, but it couldn't buy her the one thing she desired above all else: a child's laughter echoing down her halls, the sticky touch of a small hand in hers. The simple, unconditional love that comes with building a family. Years had passed, filled with whispered hopes and crushing disappointments, failed treatments that left emotional scars deeper than any physical pain. The sterile scent of clinics lingered in her memory, a constant reminder of her body's perceived failure. Each birthday became a quiet, painful milestone, a stark reminder of the ticking clock and the dreams slipping further away. She felt like an imposter, a woman who had conquered the business world but was defeated by biology, standing alone in a world designed for connection. The vastness of her empty home pressed in on her, the silence amplifying the sound of her own yearning heart. It was in the darkest hours, surrounded by unparalleled luxury that felt utterly meaningless, that the radical idea began to take root. Adoption. It wasn't the path she had initially envisioned, filled with the romanticized glow of pregnancy, but it felt like a lifeline, a chance, perhaps the only chance, to fill the cavernous void that wealth had paradoxically deepened, highlighting her isolation rather than alleviating it. The thought was terrifying, daunting, fraught with unknowns, but it also brought a tiny flicker of hope, a warmth spreading through the cold emptiness, the first hint of a possibility that her silent world might one day know the vibrant chaos of a child's love. It was a decision born of desperation, yes, but also of a deep, fundamental human need that transcended the limits of her privileged life, setting her on a path she never could have foreseen. The world had felt gray and muted since the silence of the nursery echoed Sarah's deepest fears. But a spark, faint yet persistent, urged her onward, pushing through the heavy fog of loss. She searched, not just online or in sterile agency brochures, but in the whispers of the community, through networks that spoke of quiet needs and unheard cries. It led her down forgotten streets, past peeling paint and shadowed doorways, to a place where poverty clung to the air like the scent of damp concrete and despair. Then she heard about the baby girl, barely a few weeks old, living in conditions that squeezed the breath from Sarah's lungs just thinking about them. A tiny life adrift in a world of scarcity. Her heart ached with a fierce protectiveness she hadn't felt since hope had last resided within her. The meeting was arranged in a neutral, sterile office, a stark contrast to the life the baby knew. The air crackled with unspoken tension, thick with the weight of worlds colliding. The birth mother, young and fragile, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and hardship, sat clutching worn hands. The smell of disinfectant couldn't mask the faint, lingering scent of stale cigarettes and desperation that seemed to cling to her. It was painful, raw. Sarah saw not judgment, but a profound sadness, the brutal hand life had dealt this young woman. The conversation was a delicate dance around loss, one woman's inability to keep, another's desperate need to receive. There were tears, quiet sobs that racked the birth mother's thin frame, a deep guttural sound of maternal grief forced into an impossible corner. It wasn't anger or resentment Sarah felt from her, but a heartbreaking resignation, a plea hidden in every glance that this child would have a chance she herself could never provide. The legal steps that followed were a maze of paperwork, assessments, and waiting. Each signature felt monumental, each court date a battle against unseen forces, bureaucracy, potential challenges, the sheer weight of judgment from a world that often failed to understand such complex, painful decisions. Sarah navigated it with a quiet determination, the image of that tiny, vulnerable face her constant guide. The disparity between her stable, comfortable life and the precipice the birth parents teetered upon was never far from her mind. It fueled her resolve, transforming her grief into a powerful engine of purpose. This wasn't just about fulfilling her dream of motherhood, it was about offering a lifeline, a chance at a different story for a child born into the shadow of poverty. The process was a stark reminder of life's cruel inequalities, a moral weight that settled deep in Sarah's soul. But beneath it pulsed a fierce, unwavering hope. The air inside the mansion hung thick with the scent of expensive polish and aged velvet. Sunlight, filtered through towering, ornate windows, gilded the polished floors and bounced off countless gilded frames and delicate figurines. Lily knew every corner, every hushed hallway lined with portraits of stern faces and billowing gowns. Her rooms overflowed with toys, dolls with porcelain skin, miniature carriages pulled by clockwork horses, vast collections of painted blocks and colorful silks. The kitchen always held trays of perfect little cakes and pitchers of cool, sweet lemonade. Materially, she wanted for nothing. Yet, the quiet vastness of the house echoed with a different kind of emptiness. Sarah, her guardian, moved through these rooms like a figure carved from ice, beautiful, distant, and utterly untouchable. There were tutors and nannies, dressmakers and cooks, a constant retinue of staff who hovered solicitously but never truly saw her. Sarah would appear in a swirl of expensive fabric, her smile a practiced, brittle thing. She might comment on Lily's posture, the neatness of her hair, or the proper way to hold a teacup. But there were no warm embraces, no shared laughter that wasn't manufactured for display, no comfort offered when a scraped knee brought tears. Lily learned early that Sarah's attention was best garnered by being quiet, compliant, and looking the part of the perfect, well-bred child. Any childish exuberance, any clumsy mistake, was met with a sharp glance or a cool, clipped sentence that felt colder than the marble statues lining the grand staircase. It was control, subtle and constant, a silken thread binding Lily to an invisible standard of perfection.
Children should be seen, not heard, Lily. And when seen, they should be impeccable.
Sarah's voice, smooth as glass, when sliced through the quiet. Lily would nod, a small ache blooming in her chest. She would watch other children sometimes, through the wrought iron gates of the estate, playing boisterously, with parents who knelt in the grass, their faces creased with genuine smiles. A profound, confusing sense of difference settled upon her young shoulders. Why did her guardian not look at her like that? Why did the endless toys feel like props in a play she didn't understand? The opulent rooms, the endless supply of beautiful things, they didn't feel like freedom. They felt like walls, enclosing her in a life that was rich in appearance, but starved of genuine connection. The golden cage shimmered beautifully, but it was a cage nonetheless, and the tiny inhabitant was beginning to feel the bars. The world around Lily shifted, colors deepening, sounds growing sharper. Yet she felt a strange disconnect, a persistent hum of unease just beneath the surface of her skin as her teenage years unfurled. It wasn't the awkwardness of adolescence alone. It was something else. A subtle wrongness that felt like a loose thread on a favorite sweater, always snagging when she least expected it. Sometimes it was the way light hit her adoptive mother's eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't name, when Lily asked a casual question about her earliest memories. Other times, it was the lingering scent of old paper and dust that seemed to cling to certain parts of the house, particularly near the attic door, a place her parents always discouraged her from exploring. There was a rough, woven blanket tucked away in a rarely used closet, unlike anything else in their home, its texture alien beneath her fingertips, sparking an odd, fleeting image she couldn't grasp. During a noisy family gathering, a hushed conversation drifted across the room, stopping abruptly as Lily entered. An aunt quickly changed the subject, her smile tight. Later, she heard her uncle murmur something about before and complicated arrangements, words that seemed to hang in the air, heavy and significant, before her mother gently steered him towards another topic. It wasn't the content itself, but the sudden silence, the averted gazes, that sent a prickle of intuition down Lily's spine. They knew something she didn't. Something important. The taste of dinner in her mouth suddenly felt bland. The familiar warmth of the room momentarily chilled. Why the secrecy? Why the sudden shifts in conversation? A persistent question began to form, quiet at first, then growing louder in the chambers of her mind. If her parents loved her so much, why did talking about her past feel like stepping onto thin ice? Why did she have this pervasive sense of being a puzzle piece from a different box, somehow made to fit where she was? That quiet feeling, once just a whisper, now resonated with the force of a drumbeat, demanding answers. The secure foundation of her childhood began to show faint cracks, and through them seeped the chilling possibility that the story she had always known wasn't the whole truth. Her heart ached with a nascent curiosity, mixed with a fear of what uncovering that truth might reveal. The surface calm of her life was disturbed, replaced by a growing awareness of the profound questions lying just beneath. The air in the attic was thick with the scent of forgotten years, dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light that pierced the gloom from a high window. Lily was helping her mother clear out some old things, a chore she usually dreaded, but today it felt less burdensome. She sifted through cardboard boxes filled with faded linens, and moth-eaten clothes. The rough texture of the fabric dry against her fingertips. Deeper in one box, beneath layers of yellowed newspaper, her hand brushed against something smooth and hard. It was a small, wooden box, intricately carved, cool to the touch despite the attic's warmth. Curiosity piqued, she lifted it out. It wasn't locked. A slight pressure on the lid, and it creaked open, revealing not jewelry or keepsakes, but a stack of old photographs tied with a fraying ribbon. The top photo showed a smiling young woman she didn't recognize, holding a baby. As Lily carefully untied the ribbon, a loose picture slipped from the bundle. She picked it up, her breath catching in her throat. It was a photograph of herself, undeniably, but younger, maybe 3 or 4 years old. She was standing beside a man and a woman she had never seen before. Their faces kind, unfamiliar. They were standing in front of a house that was certainly not the one she grew up in. A sense of immediate, jarring wrongness settled over her. This wasn't just a random old photo. It felt deeply personal, yet utterly disconnected from the life she knew. Her heart began to pound, a heavy, frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back in looping cursive were 3 words: "Our little girl." Not our adopted daughter, just our little girl. A name and date were also present, but the name wasn't her parents' name. A chill, cold and sharp, traced its way down her spine, despite the stifling heat of the attic. Her parents had always told her the same story. They adopted her as a baby, only a few months old, through the proper channels, from a specific agency in a specific city, one far from the location implied by the photo. They had shared pictures of her as an infant, photos that aligned perfectly with their narrative. But this photograph, this woman, this man, this setting, this different name, they didn't fit. They shattered the clear, simple picture she had held in her mind for her entire life. She felt the sturdy foundation of her world tilt precariously. The story she believed, the truth about her origins, felt like a carefully constructed wall. And this single photograph was the first stone knocked loose, revealing an abyss of uncertainty behind it. Her hands trembled, holding the evidence of a potential deception. The familiar comfort of her home, her family, suddenly felt like a thin, painted surface stretched over something hidden and potentially terrible. How could this be? Who were these people? And why had her parents never shown her this, never mentioned them? The silence of the attic suddenly felt suffocating, amplifying the terrifying question echoing in her mind. What else about her life wasn't real? The heavy secret pressed down on Lily's chest, a physical weight she carried everywhere now. The shock of the initial clue had faded, replaced by a cold, gnawing suspicion that refused to be ignored. It felt like a phantom limb, an essential part of herself she couldn't see or touch, buried under layers of carefully constructed silence. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her past held answers, and she was the only one who could find them. Her investigation began in the hushed hours of the night, hunched over a laptop, the screen's pale glow illuminating the dark corners of her room. Search terms felt clumsy on her fingertips. Old addresses, names whispered once in forgotten conversations, dates that held a strange resonance. Each query was a hesitant step into the unknown, fraught with the fear of stumbling into something terrible. The internet, usually a boundless source of information, became a frustrating maze of dead ends and irrelevant data. She felt small and exposed, a novice trying to decode a language she didn't understand. The digital world offered few whispers. She needed something tangible, something real. That need drove her into the dusty quiet of the local library's archives. Disguised in a simple baseball cap pulled low and nondescript clothes, she felt like a spy in a cheap novel, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a gunshot in her ears. The air hung heavy with the dry scent of aging paper and mildew, a smell that clung to her clothes long after she left. Her fingers trembled as she leafed through brittle old newspapers, the tiny print blurring before her eyes. Pages turned, hours bled into one another, but the vital connections remained stubbornly hidden. She found vague mentions, fleeting names, but nothing solid, nothing that fit the fragmented pieces of her puzzle. Every encounter, no matter how brief, heightened her anxiety. Asking a librarian for help with microfiche records felt like confessing a crime. A casual glance from another patron sent her heart hammering against her ribs. The constant fear of being recognized, of someone noticing her relentless, focused search, made her breath catch in her throat. She imagined eyes watching her from behind stacks of books, judging her quiet desperation. She ventured to old neighborhoods, walking streets she vaguely remembered, the familiar scent of blooming jasmine mixing with the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. Dilapidated buildings stood where her fragmented memories placed them, but they offered no clues, just silent facades guarding their secrets. Trying to talk to older residents proved futile. They were either uninterested, forgetful, or subtly resistant, their polite smiles masking a reluctance to delve into the past. Each failure, each dead end was a blow, chipping away at her fragile hope. Doubt began to creep in, an insidious voice whispering that she was chasing ghosts, that perhaps the truth was meant to stay buried. But the feeling, the undeniable intuition rooted deep within her, wouldn't let her stop. Despite the fumbling attempts, the frustrating setbacks, and the suffocating fear of exposure, Lily knew this secret investigation was only just beginning. The whispers were faint, almost inaudible, but she was starting to listen. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of light piercing the gloom of the cramped storage space. Lily's fingers, grimy and tired, traced the rough wood grain of another unfamiliar box. Each item she lifted felt heavy with the weight of unspoken history, of lives she had never known, leaving her stomach knotted with a persistent, dull ache. She had sifted through piles of forgotten things, brittle photographs, moth-eaten blankets, trinkets that chimed sadly as she moved them, finding only whispers and shadows, nothing solid, nothing concrete that spoke directly to the burning questions in her heart. Doubt, a venomous vine, had begun to creep back into her thoughts, whispering that she was chasing ghosts, that the truth she sought was buried too deep or simply did not exist. It was a weary place to be, adrift in the past, with no anchor. Her hand brushed against the side of a particularly deep crate, filled with yellowed linens and old clothing that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Tucked low against one corner, almost hidden by the thick fabric, she felt the edge of something hard, smooth, and out of place. Curiosity, a flicker of the fire that had driven her to this point, urged her onward. With careful movements, she unearthed a small, elegantly carved wooden box, its surface warm beneath her touch. It wasn't locked, and the lid lifted with a soft sigh of protesting wood. Inside, nestled among a few sentimental bits of ribbon and a dried flower that crumbled at her gaze, lay a single, folded piece of paper. It looked ancient, its edges softened and browned The ink on its surface faded but still legible. Her heart gave a violent lurch, a sudden powerful drum against her ribs that stole her breath. Her hands trembled as she gently unfolded the fragile document. There, written in a spidery, unfamiliar hand, were words that seemed to leap from the page, defying the passage of years. A date, clear and specific, stood out, a date eerily close to her own birthday. Below it, a name she had never heard before, coupled with an address in a town she had only seen on maps. This wasn't vague conjecture or a tenuous connection. This was a tangible link, a solid piece of evidence that slammed into her like a physical blow. It was a name and place directly tied to the time she had been born, to circumstances she had only ever known through the sterile language of official papers and the carefully curated memories shared by her adoptive parents. A dizzying wave of emotion washed over her. Shock, confusion, a burgeoning sense of betrayal. And beneath it all, a fierce, white-hot flicker of vindication. The doubt that had plagued her moments before evaporated, replaced by an undeniable certainty. The story she had been told was incomplete, perhaps deliberately so. This faded piece of paper, tucked away and forgotten, was a key, unlocking a door she had only dreamed existed. It solidified everything, proving that her instincts were right, that there was indeed more to her story, a hidden chapter waiting to be read. The weariness fell away, replaced by a sharp, focused determination. She had found the truth, not the whole truth yet, but enough to light the path forward, enough to know that the search was far from over. It had just truly begun. A knot tightened in Lily's stomach as she watched Sarah across the room. The casual hum of conversation felt like a roar in her ears. The air hung heavy with unspoken tension, at least on her side. She carried the weight of her findings, fragments of truth that felt like fragile glass in her hands, pieces that didn't fit the polished narrative she'd been given. Gathering her courage, a shaky breath filling her lungs, she approached. "Sarah," Lily began, her voice a little quieter than she intended, a tremor she hoped wasn't audible. She tried to keep her expression neutral, friendly even, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She held a folder, seemingly innocent, but inside were the papers that screamed discrepancies. Could I ask you about something I found?" Sarah turned, a pleasant smile initially on her face, but it wavered slightly as her gaze met Lily's, lingering for just a beat too long on the folder. The warmth in her eyes seemed to cool, replaced by a guarded watchfulness. A faint scent of expensive perfume, usually comforting, now seemed sharp, almost acrid, in the sudden shift in atmosphere.
It's about some details regarding the project timeline. There seem to be some dates here that don't quite match up with what was presented earlier.
Lily's voice was low, cautious, trying to frame it as a simple query, a matter of clarification. Sarah's smile vanished completely. Her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly, and her eyes narrowed, losing all trace of previous warmth. The polite mask slipped, revealing something harder, colder beneath. She didn't immediately answer, her silence stretching, thick and uncomfortable, filling the space between them. The vibrant colors of the room seemed to dim, the background noise fading into a dull roar as Lily felt the full force of Sarah's shift.
Why are you looking into old timelines, Lily? Everything's on track now. You should focus on your current tasks.
Sarah's voice was smooth, but laced with an undeniable edge, dismissive and sharp. She didn't meet Lily's gaze fully, instead looking past her, as if already bored with the conversation. Lily felt a chill trace its way down her spine. This wasn't mere forgetfulness or confusion. This was intentional deflection. It's just, I need to understand the full picture to make sure everything is aligned going forward. Lily pressed gently, but her heart hammered against her ribs. These specific dates, they seemed to indicate a delay that wasn't accounted for in the initial reports. Sarah finally looked directly at Lily, and in her eyes, Lily saw not just annoyance, but a flicker of something akin to warning. The casual dismissal hardened into something more pointed.
Some things are better left alone, Lily. Digging into the past rarely helps anyone. It can even, create unnecessary problems for everyone.
The words hung in the air, unspoken threats weaving through the carefully casual tone. The air felt suddenly thin, difficult to breathe. Sarah's subtle menace, the way she had so easily shifted from pleasant colleague to cold gatekeeper, confirmed Lily's deepest fears. It wasn't just confusion or oversight. There were deliberate secrets being kept, and the truth was being intentionally buried. The taste in Lily's mouth turned bitter. The hopeful courage she'd arrived with curdling into fear and grim determination. The path ahead was not just difficult, it was dangerous. She was facing not just error, but deceit, protected by a wall of silence and lies. The sting of Sarah's dismissiveness lingered, a cold, damp residue on Lily's resolve, yet it did not shatter it. It hardened it, forging a steel within her that hummed with quiet fury and desperate determination. If the past would not yield its secrets through simple questioning, she would dig them up herself, root by root, no matter the cost or the effort. She was an underdog fighting an unseen enemy, a buried history. The search intensified, escalating beyond casual inquiries into a relentless pursuit. Libraries became hushed battlegrounds, filled with the dry, faint smell of aged paper and the soft click of computer keyboards. County clerk offices felt like labyrinthine tombs, holding forgotten truths. She pored over dusty microfiches that whirred and flickered, squinting at faded entries from decades past. Online databases, initially a blur of meaningless names and dates, slowly began to form patterns as she cross-referenced and filtered. Fueled by adrenaline and lukewarm coffee, she considered hiring a private investigator, the thought a tantalizing possibility, but the cost was daunting. For now, her limited resources dictated a path of self-reliance, leaning heavily on the often tedious process of navigating public access information. Each dead end was a frustrating blow, a small skirmish lost, leaving her throat tight with disappointment. The air in these official buildings felt thick and heavy, pressing down on her shoulders. Weeks blurred into a monotonous cycle of searching and frustration, punctuated by moments of flicker and near misses. Then, deep within a county archive, buried amongst divorce decrees and property transfers from the late 1990s, she found it. Not her adoption record itself, which remained sealed, but a tangential file referencing the care facility where she was born, dated just months before her adoption. The paper felt fragile beneath her trembling fingers, smelling faintly of mildew and decay. It wasn't much, just a list of registered residents and staff, and a brief administrative note about the facility's operational challenges, and a subsequent change in management structure due to regulatory concerns. The phrase regulatory concerns pulsed on the page like a warning signal. It wasn't the sterile language of a clean transfer. It hinted at problems, perhaps neglect, perhaps worse. And listed among the staff was a name she recognized from the minimal adoption papers she possessed. Not Sarah, but another woman, listed as the primary caretaker. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the archives. A sense of cold dread washed over her, a chilling premonition settling in her gut. This wasn't just about finding her birth parents anymore. It was about uncovering the conditions she was born into, the environment of her first vulnerable months, and understanding who these people truly were, the ones whose decisions had shaped her life in ways she was only just beginning to comprehend. The truth had roots, and they felt disturbingly dark. The air in the cramped back room of the community archives felt thick with the scent of aged paper and something faintly metallic, like old locks. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that cut through the grimy window pane. Lily's fingers, calloused from work but nimble with purpose, traced lines on brittle documents. Hours blurred into a single, focused quest, fueled by nervous energy and the lingering taste of lukewarm coffee. She had followed a faint trail, a whisper from an old acquaintance who mentioned hushed-up incidents decades ago, leading her here to the forgotten corners of public records. Each rustle of paper, each creak of the worn wooden chair, amplified the tension coiling in her gut. This was more than just curiosity now. It was a primal need to understand the void in her past. She found it buried deep within a ledger of local births and placements from nearly 30 years ago. An entry, almost too faint to read, listed her name, followed by information that seemed utterly incongruous with everything she had ever been told. Her birth parents, far from the simple, struggling figures she had imagined, were listed with an address in the affluent part of the city, associated with a prominent, if now defunct, local business. The official reason for her placement was vague, something about incapacity of guardians, but a handwritten note, barely visible in the margin, hinted at something far more sinister. Investigation pending. Investigation? No one had ever mentioned an investigation. A cold dread washed over her, settling deep in her bones. It wasn't just a mix-up or misfortune. There was a hint of deliberate action. Digging further, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird, she found an old newspaper clipping tucked into a folder filed under the same year. The headline screamed, "Prominent couple disappear," featuring a grainy photo of a man and woman who bore an undeniable, haunting resemblance to her own features. The article spoke of vanishing without a trace, of rumors swirling around business dealings, and unanswered questions. Their names matched the names in the ledger listing her birth, the names, the address, the disappearance. It clicked into place with a horrifying finality. Her parents hadn't simply been unable to care for her. They had vanished under suspicious circumstances, possibly victims of foul play, and the official records surrounding her own birth and placement had been deliberately obscured or altered. The life of hardship, the years of feeling lost and unwanted, were built upon a foundation of deceit. A wave of nausea rolled over her. The pleasant spring breeze outside the window felt suddenly distant and irrelevant. She touched the brittle newspaper clipping, feeling the rough texture of aged newsprint, and a profound sorrow, mingled with a simmering rage, began to rise within her. This revelation didn't just fill a blank space. It tore down everything she thought she knew, replacing it with a stark, brutal truth. Her underdog status wasn't just fate. It was potentially the result of a crime that had gone unpunished. The conflict wasn't just internal anymore. It was external, rooted in a past she was now driven to expose. The taste in her mouth turned bitter, not from the old coffee, but from the raw, painful truth. The air in the quiet cafe was thick with unspoken history, carrying the faint scent of brewing coffee and worn furniture. Lily's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat echoing the years of unanswered questions. Across the small table sat a woman whose face held a haunting, unfamiliar familiarity, etched with lines of hardship and time. The moment their eyes met, a wave of profound emotion washed over Lily. A strange mix of sorrow, relief, and bewildering connection. It was like looking into a mirror, reflecting a life she had never lived, yet was intrinsically bound to. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the untouched teacup, the delicate porcelain cool against her fingertips. The woman, her birth mother, her name was Eleanor, shifted nervously in her seat, her gaze distant for a moment before settling back on Lily, filled with a fragile vulnerability Lily hadn't anticipated. The image Lily had held in her mind for so long, a phantom figure from a sealed past, suddenly had a physical presence, a quiet breath, the subtle rustle of fabric. Eleanor took a slow, shaky breath, the sound almost imperceptible in the quiet cafe.
I never thought this day would come. So many years.
Her voice was soft, raspy, carrying the weight of decades of silence and pain. The first cracks in the polished facade of her adopted life began to show, revealing a hidden, complex truth. Eleanor didn't fit the narrative Lily had sometimes imagined of indifference or abandonment. Her eyes held a deep, lingering sadness, a sorrow that spoke of a different kind of suffering.
It wasn't my choice. Lily, not truly. They made it seem like the only way. There was so much pressure, so much shame.
The words tumbled out hesitantly at first, then gained a quiet momentum, painting a picture of a young woman alone, facing immense societal judgment and familial disapproval. The cafe walls seemed to recede as Eleanor recounted whispers, threats, the chilling finality of documents signed under duress. Lily listened, her mind reeling, the familiar world tilting on its axis. This wasn't the simple story of a mother giving up a child. It was a narrative steeped in conflict, control, and a profound lack of agency for a young woman caught in impossible circumstances. Every word Eleanor spoke chipped away at Lily's long-held assumptions, replacing them with a visceral understanding of past injustice. The underdog wasn't just Lily. It was also the woman across from her, a victim of the very system and prejudices that had shaped Lily's early life. The initial shock gave way to a deep, unsettling empathy. This meeting wasn't just finding a missing piece. It was uncovering the painful origin of the puzzle itself. A dark foundation upon which her own life had been built. The emotional weight pressed down, heavy and undeniable, marking the true beginning of her search for justice. A raw, trembling voice filled the small room, thick with decades of unspoken pain. Tears traced paths through the dust on the birth mother's cheeks as the truth, heavy and suffocating, spilled out. It wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a carefully constructed cage of lies Sarah had built, brick by painstaking brick. The air grew cold with the chilling realization of the depth of the betrayal. The birth mother described the whispers Sarah had planted, painting a false picture of a family who didn't want the child, of a future devoid of love or opportunity if she didn't sign the papers. She detailed the letters she had written over the years, filled with longing and updates, letters that Sarah had intercepted, tearing apart connections before they could even begin to form. For 2 decades, Sarah had actively maintained the wall between them. She had told the adoptive family the birth mother was unstable, uninterested, even dangerous. She had told the birth mother the child was happy and thriving, but wished for no contact, a lie that had splintered the birth mother's heart countless times. Every perceived silence, every unanswered question, every aching gap in their lives over the past 20 years was a direct result of Sarah's calculated interference. It wasn't neglect. It was active, malicious suppression of truth and connection. The weight of understanding this systematic deception pressed down, making it hard to breathe, hard to comprehend such sustained cruelty. The protagonist sat stunned, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The odd inconsistencies, the hushed conversations, the strange barriers that always seemed to arise, they weren't coincidences. They were strands in the intricate tapestry of deceit Sarah had been weaving, a life-size deception that had stolen years, stolen moments, stolen a shared history. The birth mother's confession, punctuated by choked sobs, painted a picture of a woman trapped by guilt and a desire for forgiveness, finally strong enough to dismantle Sarah's elaborate falsehoods. The sheer scale of the manipulation over 20 long years was a bitter pill, a testament to how easily a trusted source could twist reality, leaving wreckage in their wake. But with the truth laid bare, a spark ignited. The realization that understanding the architect of the pain was the first step toward reclaiming what had been lost. The sticky feeling of betrayal coating everything began to fuel a quiet, burning resolve. 20 years felt like an eternity. Each year a stone piled onto a heavy burden of unanswered questions. A silent ache in the soul. But the silence was shattered now, replaced by the sickening realization that it wasn't fate that had kept them apart, but calculated, deliberate cruelty. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was a bitter taste, acrid and cold on the tongue. Sarah hadn't just allowed distance to grow. She had actively cultivated it, like a poisonous vine strangling out all hope. The birth family, already vulnerable, grappling with loss and uncertainty, had been easy prey. Sarah had seen their raw edges, their desperate longing, and instead of offering solace, she had twisted it into a weapon. They had sent letters filled with hesitant love and hopeful updates, letters that never reached their destination. Sarah had intercepted them, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar return addresses before the paper met the shredder. A quiet act of malice performed under the guise of protection. They had made tearful calls, their voices thick with yearning, only to be met with curt, misleading answers about busy schedules or inconvenient times, crafted lies designed to create an insurmountable wall. She had painted a false picture, whispering doubts and fabricating scenarios that made any search seem futile, even dangerous. She exploited their deep-seated fears, played on their insecurities about their past circumstances, suggesting they weren't good enough, weren't ready, weaving a narrative of separation that placed the blame squarely on phantom obstacles or the birth family's own perceived failings. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, executed over 2 decades with chilling precision. The full weight of her actions pressed down, a physical force stealing the air from lungs. 20 years. Every missed birthday, every silent holiday, every moment of wondering what might have been, all of it was a direct result of her choices. The sheer scale of the injustice was breathtaking, leaving a burning sensation behind the eyes. It wasn't an accident, wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a prolonged act of calculated prevention, a willful severing of bonds that had every right to exist. The knowledge settled deep in the bones, a cold, hard lump. The years of passive suffering were over. The fog of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a clear, sharp view of the enemy. The path forward was steep, but for the first time in 20 years, they knew exactly who had blocked the way. Sarah's reign of quiet tyranny was exposed, and with that exposure came the dawning strength to fight for what had been stolen. The moral clarity was absolute. Deceit could build walls, but truth possessed the power to tear them down. Stone by painful stone, Lily stood before Sarah, the air thick with unspoken accusations and years of simmering resentment. In her hands, she held the undeniable proof: documents, emails, voicemails, painstakingly gathered threads woven into a damning tapestry of deceit. The truth, raw and exposed, hung between them like a physical weight. Sarah's eyes, previously holding their usual veneer of cool control, widened slightly, a flicker of something akin to fear dancing in their depths as she saw the grim resolve etched on Lily's face. It started with a breathy, disbelieving laugh, a sound brittle and sharp, like snapping ice.
What is this? Some kind of joke, Lily?
Her voice, though attempting mockery, lacked its usual bite. She gestured dismissively, as if swatting away a fly, but her hand trembled slightly. Denial was the first fortress she attempted to build, a flimsy wall against the encroaching tide of reality. Lily remained silent, her gaze steady, allowing the weight of the evidence to press down. The scent of stale office coffee and Sarah's expensive perfume seemed to clash, adding to the charged atmosphere, as Lily laid the papers gently on the polished desk, aligning them with deliberate slowness. Sarah's initial shock began to crumble. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the headlines of emails, the dates on documents. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin pale and drawn.
No, you don't understand. There were reasons. Business reasons.
Her voice grew higher, a frantic edge creeping in. Justification. The second, equally fragile defense. She tried to reach for a document, but her fingers hovered, unable to grasp it. Lily finally spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying an unnerving strength, forged in the crucible of past suffering. It was the voice of the victim who had risen, who now held the mirror to the bully's soul.
There are no reasons that justify tearing someone's life apart, Sarah.
The simple words landed with the force of hammer blows. They weren't just accusations. They were the summation of pain endured, the undeniable truth of Sarah's cruelty. The coolness in the room seemed to deepen, chilling Sarah to the bone, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun streaming through the window. The frantic attempts to justify, to twist the narrative, accelerated.
Everyone does it. It's just how things work. You were in the way. I had to protect myself.
Her words tumbled out in a desperate torrent, exposing the raw, ugly core of her self-preservation at any cost. But even as she spoke, her eyes darted around the room as if seeking an escape that didn't exist. She could feel the walls closing in, the solid ground beneath her feet turning to quicksand. The carefully constructed world she had built on manipulation and deceit was vibrating, on the verge of complete collapse. Then, the dam broke. The denial, the justification, the frantic energy, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, exposed vulnerability she had never shown. A choked sob escaped her lips, ragged and heart-wrenching. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Tears streamed down her face, silent at first, then giving way to heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Her world, the one she had meticulously crafted and ruthlessly protected, was imploding right before Lily's eyes. The sound of her broken weeping filled the room, a stark, dramatic end to the confrontation. She was utterly defeated, her reign of cruelty ending not with a bang, but with a whimper of despair. Lily watched, a quiet, weary witness to the reckoning. The silence that followed the shattering truth was heavier than any sound could ever be. It pressed in on Sarah from all sides, a tangible weight of judgment and disbelief. Faces that had moments before held admiration or collegial warmth were now masks of cold contempt. She felt the shift viscerally, like an electric current draining from the room, leaving behind only stagnant, hostile air. A knot formed in her stomach, tighter than any she had ever known. Her carefully constructed reputation, a facade built brick by painstaking brick over years of calculated deception, didn't just crack, it imploded. Whispers started immediately, not hushed secrets anymore, but sharp, cutting sounds that sliced through the quiet. People averted their eyes, but not before their gazes lingered, filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. The ground beneath her feet didn't just feel unstable, it felt like it had given way entirely, plunging her into an icy void. Invitations that had filled her calendar vanished. Her phone, usually a constant source of connection, fell silent, save for the occasional harsh message or the terrifying absence of a reply. Longtime friends, people she had shared countless meals and confidences with, now treated her as if she carried a contagion. One former confidant, her eyes hard as flint, delivered a final, stinging blow.
I don't know who you are anymore, Sarah. I thought I did. Everything was a lie.
The words felt like physical blows, echoing the destruction happening around her. Doors that had always been open to her were now firmly shut. She saw the backs of retreating figures, heard the final click of a lock engaging, each sound a hammer blow against her crumbling world. The sweet scent of success and acceptance she had grown accustomed to was replaced by the bitter odor of betrayal and ruin. The world didn't just turn its back, it actively pushed her away, leaving her stranded on an island of her own making. This was the bitter fruit of her harvest, the profound destruction sown by her long-held secrets, blossoming into a devastating reality. The air in the small room felt heavy, thick with the residue of tears and the bitter taste of truth. Lily sat huddled on the floor, the polished wood cold against her knees, her body aching with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. Her mind replayed the words, the revelations, like shards of glass twisting in a wound that felt impossibly deep. This wasn't just shock. It was a fundamental shattering of everything she believed about herself, about the world. The betrayal was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. How could they? How could the people she loved, who had raised her, spun such elaborate falsehoods for so long? Each happy memory now seemed tainted, viewed through the lens of deception. The scent of dust motes, dancing in a sliver of sunlight, was the only sensory detail that seemed real in the haze of her pain. Everything else felt like a dream dissolving at dawn. Confusion swirled, a dizzying vortex pulling her identity apart. Was she the girl from the quiet, loving home she'd always known, or the child of a past she couldn't comprehend? Two families, two worlds starkly different, now collided within her soul, leaving her adrift without an anchor. The complex reality was a knot she couldn't untangle, each attempt only tightening the pain. Slowly, agonizingly, she pushed herself up, her muscles stiff and protesting. Her eyes, swollen and red-rimmed, scanned the room, a space that felt both intimately familiar and suddenly alien. A small, chipped teacup sat on a saucer. It was a trivial thing, yet it held the ghost of a shared moment, a genuine smile. That tiny, real memory was a sliver of light in the overwhelming darkness. Healing wouldn't be swift, wouldn't be easy. It would be a slow, painstaking process of sifting through the wreckage, separating the love, however complicated, from the lies. Understanding felt like a mountain she had barely begun to climb, shrouded in fog. But the ache in her chest, while still profound, now carried a faint, fragile echo of resilience. She had been broken, yes, but the pieces, however scattered, were still hers. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could be put back together. The salt spray kissed Lily's cheeks as she walked along the coast, the rhythmic crash of waves a steady counterpoint to the thoughts churning within her. Sarah's deceit had splintered her world, leaving jagged edges of betrayal and the unsettling ghost of an identity she'd never known. The immediate shock had passed, replaced now by a quiet, persistent ache and the monumental task of choosing her future. There was the possibility of seeking out the birth family, a tangled web of unknowns hinted at in the fragments she'd uncovered. The idea felt like stepping into a different life, perhaps one meant for her, or perhaps a new source of pain. It represented a connection, a root system she'd always lacked. Yet the fear of further disappointment or complexity weighed heavily. Then there was the option of actively distancing herself, severing the ties that bound her to Sarah's manipulative past, retreating from the fallout that had scarred her heart and reputation. This felt like a form of self-preservation, erecting walls to shield herself from future hurt. But it also felt isolating. She paused, digging her toes into the cool, wet sand. The path ahead wasn't about choosing between two established routes, but about carving her own. Her resilience, tested by years of subtle control and culminating in the seismic shock of the truth, wasn't about bouncing back to what was, but about building something new from the ground up. She didn't need Sarah's version of identity, nor did she feel compelled to fit neatly into another's history. Her journey through deception had illuminated an inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. Finding peace wouldn't come from external validation or from erasing the past, but from integrating it, understanding the lessons etched into her soul. The truth, she learned, was a brutal but necessary foundation. Identity wasn't a gift bestowed upon you, but a self-discovery forged in the crucible of experience. And the consequences of deception, she knew, were not just felt by the deceived, but ultimately hollowed out the deceiver, leaving ruin in their wake. She felt a profound sense of quiet conviction settle over her. Her future would be built on honesty, vulnerability, and the unwavering belief in the person she had become, not the person someone else had tried to make her. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a warm glow across the water. She stood there, a solitary figure, silhouetted against the vast horizon, no longer lost, but finally found, within herself. The weight that had pressed down on her for so long began to lift, replaced by a simple, profound sense of peace. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The first steps on a path she was choosing, step by deliberate step. The world felt quieter now, the emotional storms of betrayal and shock having subsided. She could hear the gentle whisper of the sea, the distant cry of a seagull, the sound of her own steady breathing. It was the sound of peace, hard-won and deeply cherished. The complexities of the past remained, etched into her memory, but they no longer dictated her future. She carried the lessons forward, the crucial difference between perceived truth and genuine reality, the painful cost of living a lie, and the enduring power of facing the difficult truth head-on. Lily knew that while the scars remained, they were now symbols of survival, not wounds. She looked towards the open ocean, vast and full of possibility, a mirror to the freedom she now felt in her own heart. The path ahead was hers alone to walk, illuminated by the quiet dawn of her own making.